And this week, we're going to discuss radical altruism and romance. A bit of a different topic, but we're doing this in light of Valentine's Day. And I won't be here next week to give the Valentine's Day topic, but we're doing it this week instead. So real quick, by EA, we mean an idea and a community focused on using evidence and careful reasoning to figure out the very best ways to improve the world and then to act on that basis. So this community is a community of Christians, the ones on this call, a community of Christians who care about EA, who want to use EA as a tool to better love and serve others as Jesus taught us to. And a lot of EA involves getting together with other people who are conscientious about using their limited resources to do good, discussing what that would mean, and then taking action on that. So some practical upshots often involve, high impact careers, choosing some career path that's highly ethical or has a lot of direct good, or saving up money and giving away money, especially to effective charities where for every dollar donated, you can reliably get a lot of impact, social impact, and do a lot of good that way. So EA can get pretty all-consuming for some people. Altruistic commitments can get quite all-consuming. And when we think about the ways that altruism can, or our attempts to be altruistic can affect all areas of our life, one domain that comes up is this domain of romantic partnerships and romantic relationships. And so it seems fitting that around Valentine's Day, we discuss what is radical altruism, or what do radical altruistic commitments mean for our romantic relationships. So as a quick roadmap, I want to first look at why this might complicate romantic relationships. And then I want to briefly touch on some inspiring stories of couples who together lived really altruistic lives, and did it in ways that I don't think either of them could have done it alone, before just looking at some discussion questions. So why should radical altruism impact romance? This might be a question that you're asking, like, isn't being altruistic something that doesn't affect other areas of my life? Like, why should my altruism affect my family or my friends, or my workout routine, or my romantic partnership? Well, I think a helpful analogy here is thinking of altruism, or at least radical altruism, as a kind of all-consuming activity. I'm not saying that it must or should be this way for every single person, but I want to consider altruism in a kind of radical way, the way that Larissa McFarquhar describes in her book Strangers Drowning. And she even compares the altruism of some do-gooders, like effective altruists, as kind of like a wartime attitude, and an attitude that is kind of all-consuming, even for romantic relationships. She says, "This is the difference between do-gooders and ordinary people. For do-gooders, it is always wartime. They always feel themselves responsible for strangers. They always feel that strangers, like compatriots in war, are their own people. They know that there are always those as urgently in need as the victims of battle, and they consider themselves conscripted by duty." And if you think of a soldier going off to war, it's very common that they might leave their family for many months or even years at a time, and that has massive implications on their romantic commitments. But this idea of kind of all-consuming altruism is something we also see in Scripture. At least that's one takeaway that some people could have from this verse in Luke, where Jesus says, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even their own life, such a person cannot be my disciple." And while there may be some hyperbole here, it's clear that Jesus is calling Christians to a certain radical way of love that does require self-sacrifice. And this self-sacrifice could also involve sacrifice of certain aspects of romantic relationships. So I want to look at three ways why radical altruism might complicate romantic relationships. And the first is that radical altruism in general is just quite a strange thing. We describe something as radical because it's out of the ordinary in an extreme way. And sort of by definition, it's strange. So I thought of this famous photograph with August Landmesser, at a Nazi rally in 1936, where everybody is hailing the regime, but he was actually in a relationship with a Jewish woman, and it was actually an illegal relationship. And he was the one person at this rally in this famous photograph who did not pledge allegiance. And this could be seen as like an altruistic act, but very strange for the time, right? As are many altruistic commitments. And I'm going to quote Strangers Drowning quite a lot in this intro, but Larissa says that part of the reason do-gooders seem so strange is because they're acting on their own. They're following rules that they laid down for themselves, driven by a sense of duty that they felt since they were too small to know what duty was, or much less how anybody else thought about it. And so there's a certain sense that our altruistic commitments are kind of like our own. I mean, we might have shared intuitions with others who go to our church or who come from our backgrounds, but an individual commitment is in some sense private and strange to other people who don't know your individual background. And radical altruism or in the form of EA is actually quite strange. So we draw a lot of graphs, we do a lot of number crunching, and we do a lot of mathy stuff. And EA is not the only kind of radical altruism, and not all EAs are radical. But I think EA is a kind of strange radical altruism. Like when I see the number of child deaths, children under the age of 5 who died from preventable diseases, this graph just makes me incredibly sad. And when I see things like, when I can recall many times I've had discussions with people who are like super diligent with their savings and have everything in spreadsheets, and also that they can give a little bit more money away at the end of the year. And when I was first getting into EA, I thought, wow, these things are like quite strange, and I describe these things to friends of mine who just aren't like as EA, and they're like, wow, that's actually very strange. And this is just something different that I think can complicate romantic relationships. Like if you're introducing this to other people, like, yeah, I get on Zoom calls on the weekend. I go to calls and conferences with people I've never met because I want to give money away. It's just such a radical different thing. And we discuss topics in EA, at least, that are pretty weird. Like we discuss things like existential risk and the possibility of artificial intelligence falling into the wrong powers and upsetting governance across the world, or just things like this, or animal welfare, or wild animal suffering. Very strange things that might not be something you want to mention on the first date. But then radical altruism in general is just very constricting, right? If we think of what altruism requires of us, it requires our money, it requires our time, it requires our presence. And these are all things that come at a cost. If you think about people who commit a certain amount of income every year to give away to those in need, that comes at a cost to dates that you could have, to travel, to gifts that you could make. It comes at a cost of time. A lot of the time that you're spending working on a project that you're really passionate about to help the world, you could have spent doing something that might help you, that might help relationships more. Also location wise, I know some people are really glued to their calling for a certain career path, and it might require you to be either extremely flexible to moving or extremely rigid in staying where you're at. And you might do this because you think that the opportunity you have is how you would maximize your opportunity to serve. But we know that in relationships, everybody, I mean, there are two people steering the ship, right? And if one person wants to steer south and the other wants to steer north, well, you end up in a long distance relationship pretty fast, and that's not easy on relationships. So radical altruism is really constricting for just obvious reasons, and I'd love if we can just discuss these more, like the kinds of ways that if any of us in this call have been constricted by certain altruistic acts, or if we know people who've ran into roadblocks because they were making altruistic commitments, yeah, what those entail, and how you can overcome these. And the third way that radical altruism complicates relationships is that it introduces this element of impartiality. So again, in Strangers Drowning, Larissa writes that excessive altruism tended to preclude tended to preclude real intimacy with another person, because intimacy was a business of giving and receiving. But the overly moral person could not receive, could only give. And I'm just reminded of Jesus's words when Jesus says, give without expecting repayment, and give in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. And so maybe this entitles some kind of loneliness. I'm not saying it does, but like there's a certain aspect where impartiality and the secrecy of really radical altruism might destine somebody for just a more difficult time with sharing their altruistic life with somebody else. And I just want to briefly touch on some stories of altruistic people who do it together, and I think are just are empowered because they do it together. So I don't want to say radical altruism only complicates things. Like as a rough segue, I want to say that some people are really empowered by being in romantic relationships to be more altruistic, to really love and serve others better. And I don't have too much time. I'm running a bit over, but the first example that you all may actually already know about is Julia Wise and Jeff Kaufman. And they describe their story on Julia's blog, Giving Gladly. They're also featured in Strangers Drowning and several other publications, like I think New Yorker and several others. But Julia was always convicted about saving money in her piggy bank growing up, so that she could give it away to church, and then also to people who were suffering, who she didn't know. And Jeff didn't really come from this background, but he had a very high-paying job in software engineering. I think he worked at Google, or maybe still does. And when they met, Julia made it just really clear to Jeff that this was something that was very important to her. And when he realized that it really was important to her, and that she really wanted to build a life together around certain altruistic principles, they did that. And he made a commitment to give much of what he has away, or even just support Julia, while I think at first she was giving all that she had away, and Jeff was just supporting her living costs. And then he made a commitment as well. And now they have what seems like a lovely family, and they become somewhat of like leaders in the EA community as parents who've traveled down this road while still giving very, very radically and generously. Another story I want to mention that's also in the book is a story of two Christians, Sue and Hector Hogue, who met in the US Northeast. And when they met, they said they're going to have, they're planning the whole kids and family. And originally they thought they would have 2 kids and adopt 2 kids. And what happened was they kept praying about children to adopt. And after they already adopted 2 kids, they were introduced with an opportunity to adopt 1 more kid. And they prayed about it, and they really felt like God was calling them to adopt this 3rd child. And then they were introduced with another child who was disabled, who had nobody who would adopt them. And they just felt extremely convicted about living comfortably with just several children already, when they knew they could afford more. They knew they had the financial resources for it, the time for it. And they always thought, like, what would happen to this child if I did not adopt them? No, it might not be a perfect situation in my family, but it would be a lot better than if they were in orphanages or just going around the foster system. And they ended up adopting 20 kids or so. I mean, their family was over, I mean, it was over the teens in size, and and that over many years. And it was not an easy road, and has not been. But this is the kind of altruistic model, radically so, that that is something that I don't think either of them could do alone. A third story that's mentioned in the book is between Baba and Indu Amte. Baba is a famous, he's a famous reformer and NGO leader in India from the mid 20th century. Baba comes from a very well-to-do family. His father owned hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, was in the top caste in the Indian society. And Baba gave that all up after he one day encountered a man with leprosy and just felt called to start treating these people and eventually making a colony for lepers. And he actually took a vow to celibacy because he thought that his commitments to altruism were just so radical that it would be impossible for him to have a romantic relationship, much less a wife. But what happened was one day he was visiting a family friend and he saw that that the daughter of this family friend was helping a maid do some of the household tasks. And he thought, this is a very peculiar thing for someone in a top caste to do, to help a maid who's very low to the bottom of the social class system. And so he started actually like researching this woman and seeing like if she really was as altruistic as she seemed. And he found out that she treated everybody this way, and that she really did share his heart for the poor and his heart for serving. And he gave up his vow to celibacy to be with her, and she helped him grow the largest leper colony in all of India. By the time his ministry ended, in the 2000s, he had over 5,000 lepers in his colony, and she was instrumental in leading the work for this colony. So again, another example where I don't think either of them could have done anything as beautiful without each other. So with that, I'd love to jump to breakout rooms, and there's a lot to discuss on this topic, but maybe as some icebreakers, you can ask these questions. Do you find that radical altruistic commitments make romantic relationships more difficult? Or is this just like any other commitment or disposition in your life, where it could make things more difficult, but it could also make things more clear? You just have to find the right person. Does radical concern for the global poor lead to less concern for one's partner? Is this whole category of impartiality something that has to impact a romantic relationship? And then, kind of playfully, I want to ask this question: like, are people really less attracted to utilitarians? There's this recent Vox article that talks about this, and kind of related to this impartiality point, where there's been some psychological surveying done that finds that people are apparently less attracted to people who talk in consequentializing ways, and who are willing to like forego certain relationships in order to help the greater good, because it's seen as like less loyal to specific obligations and duties to specific people. And we might admire people like this, but the survey found that in general, there's like less attraction to people in a romantic sense. And then, yeah, these are just icebreakers. So as you go to breakout rooms, I'd ask you all to just be respectful about this topic. And I know you will be, because this is a wonderful community. We're all coming from a bit of a different place. Some of us may be dating. Some of us may have already made a kind of commitment to not date. Some of us might be in a long-term relationship or even married. So with that in mind, I'd love to just break out, and we have about 25 minutes for this. So we'll regroup and call it a day at the end of the hour.